Hi guys, and welcome to Drusilla's. My name is Mark and I am the Zoo Animal Manager here at Drusilla's, and today is International Sloth Day, so I'm going to be answering some of your questions that you've been asking us as we get so much popularity for our sloths. Everybody wants to know about them. They're an incredible species, really popular with you guys, so we're going to take a few questions out of a hat, literally, and see if we can answer some of those mysteries that you've all been wondering about. So, I have a few questions here. So the first question is, what is the fastest a sloth can move? Well, there isn't actually a speed limit on sloths. They have a reputation for being the slowest mammal in the world. But don't be fooled by that. They are actually very sneaky and they can be quite quick moving. So when we're here in the enclosure, servicing the exhibit, feeding the animals, doing what we need to do to look after them, all of a sudden behind you, from across the other side of the exhibit, you've got a sloth behind you, tapping you on the back of the head, asking for something nice to eat. So yeah, don't be fooled by them. They're actually quite swift and quite sneaky. So that's our first question. Another question that we've got here is, what age do they reach maturity and how many babies do they have in their lifetime? Well, they can reach maturity, reproductive maturity, in about 3 or 4 years time. Personally, I prefer them to be about 4 or older before they actually become reproductive and have a little bit of life experience. They can have a offspring maybe once a year, certainly no more often than that. The infant stays with the mum for almost the whole year and will be displaced by the next infant. And they usually only have one baby at a time. There's the occasional birth where they've had twins. That's been recorded a couple of times in captivity, but more often than not, it's just the one baby that they have. And they are fantastic mothers, absolutely incredible mothers. Dad has nothing to do with them. Once it's born, that's his job done, and he goes and takes up his favourite spot in the enclosure once again. So, what else have we got? What is the longest aged a sloth can live for? That's actually a really, really good question. And it doesn't have a particularly definitive answer, because sloths have only been bred in zoos in the last 50 years, and there haven't been a huge amount of them born, so we don't have a good grounding for how long a sloth actually lives in captivity, and nobody has followed a sloth in the wild for its entire lifetime, so we don't actually have a definitive on that. We think it is around 40 to 50 years, but there's nothing for certain on that. They could go on as long as 60 years. Similar in the way to which tortoises are a very slow animal and they live for many, many years. Sloths could be exactly the same. Our next question is, was Flash the first sloth to be hand-reared in a UK zoo? One of the first, but she wasn't the first. There was a couple of sloths being hand-reared around the time that myself and Gemma, the head keeper here at Drusilla's, were hand-rearing Flash. So there was probably about 3 or 4 that were on the go at that time, and there was a couple in the US as well that we know of that were being hand-reared around the same time. But she certainly wasn't the first, but she was definitely the best. So that's the answer to that one. Our next question, what is the most unusual fact you know about sloths? Where do I begin with a very unusual animal? Everything about the sloth is unusual. So if we take a little trip along the anatomy of a sloth, what do we know about them that is unusual? When they blink, their eyes retract. A little bit like frogs in a way, the eyeball goes back every time that they blink. They have huge noses and they have an incredible sense of smell. They have really large olfactory bulbs or in their nose for their sense of smell. They have no enamel on their teeth, so we have to be very, very careful with their dental care. We don't brush their teeth, but we just make sure that we feed them really healthy foods such as vegetables. They don't get any fruit, and they have their canines aren't true canines. They're actually coniniforms, as they're known, but they are incredibly sharp, which answers, I think, another question that we have coming up. They are razor sharp. Their hair is fascinating. They have a centre parting in their belly, which is designed so that when it rains, the rain actually drains away from their belly. Their hair grows in the opposite direction to the hair that we grow on our body, like on our arms. It grows kind of this way. On a sloth, it grows this way, and it's all to help with drainage. And if you look at the hair under a microscope, you can see lots of channels in the hair. And again, that's to help with drainage. And in those channels, because of how much it rains in the rainforest, you get a lot of algae build-up. And on that algae, you get various species of moths that really, some which only exist on sloths. So that's an incredible fact. Their teeth are always growing, their claws are always growing, which makes them very, very difficult to put an age on a sloth, because that with people that you can age people or determine the age of people, sometimes post-mortem, by their teeth or whatever it might be, but you can't do that with sloths. Sloths are, another fascinating thing about sloths, or an unusual thing about sloths, is actually their family lineage. Believe it or not, they're actually related to anteaters and armadillos, and we collectively know these as Xenathra, and Xenathra means foreign joints. So they're, as you can see from their hands and their claws, and just how her legs hooked up there on the branch, they have really, really strange joints, and they are immensely strong. You would never believe how strong a sloth could be, an animal that small. They have 4 chambers to their stomachs as well, similar to cows. They have this huge area where the food ferments down, and that's where they store this huge body of leaves, and is one of the reasons why they sleep so much. Or do they? They don't always sleep, but they have this, as Flash is doing now, looks like she's fast asleep, passed out from eating, but they actually have this thing called inactive rest. So she will be sat here now. She's not actually sleeping, she's just sitting there resting with her eyes closed, and her digestive system is going at a crazy rate to break down all of the food that she has in her tummy, and they usually defecate about once every 5 days on average, sometimes a little bit more. So that's an incredible fact. With the sloths, you can see that their nose is lovely and wet and shiny, but when they rest, it dries up because they're inactive. So when something happens that she engages with, her nose will actually start to bead up with sweat. It's like a reaction, an emotional reaction. And they also sweat from their noses as well. But where the nose gets wet, that helps with smell. So that's one of the reasons for doing it. And we also are able to gauge how healthy they are by having a nice wet nose, similar probably to what you would do with your pet dog. But also the pads. The pads need to be nice and moist as well. This helps when they're in the branches and with traction on the branches. But if she's got nice moist pads, we know that she's doing pretty well. And so in order to be able to keep the sloths nice and healthy and keep their pads nice and moist, we have to maintain the enclosure at 70% humidity or above. So 70%, hello darling, 70% or above, 70 being the lowest. It needs to be nice and humid for them. If it's not that humid, she starts doing this. She'll start scratching more and more and more. The drier it is, the more she'll start scratching. So we get all those oils in the body going by having it nice and humid. So we'll move on to another question because I could talk about this forever. Let's see what we've got. Does Flash still recognise you? Well, I would take it that that loving gaze that she just gave me was proof that she does. So with all of the animals at Drusilla's, we don't treat them like pets. We treat them as wild animals. So although we maintain strong bonds with our animals in order to be able to look after them properly, we don't pet them, we don't stroke them or anything like that. But we do work very, very closely with them, and I'm in here every day, the keepers are in here every day, so they have a trust with us, they recognise our work patterns, some of them recognise the sound of our keys and they will react to that as well. So yes, they do recognise us, and Flash lived with me for a whole year at home, and I can't believe she's going to forget that very quickly. Okay, so our final question is, what enrichment do you give your sloths? I'm hoping to do a dissertation on sloth enrichment, as there hasn't been much research on this, and I'm curious as to what you give them is given to them currently. That's a really, really good question. Not an easy one to answer, because for a huge portion of the day, this is what sloths do. They're either resting or sleeping. They actually really come into themselves in the later part of the afternoon, maybe the early morning, where they're up and about. And for me, sloths are very, very much like looking after fish. If you take care of the environment takes care of the sloth. So we make sure that the exhibit that we have for the sloths is well heated, has plenty of humidity, like I said. It's dynamic in all of the branching that we have, so that they have no regular pattern, they have multiple textures which they can interact with, and they're not really moving around at the moment because it's almost bedtime, but this is a mixed species exhibit. We have tortoises in here, and we also have pygmy marmosets in here. So in the wild, no animal lives on its own. They're always interacting with other species. That's really important that we replicate that in a captive environment. So they interact with all of the other animals. But as I said, sloths have an amazing sense of smell. So we make sure they get lots of different herbs, olfactory enrichment that we call it. So things that they can smell. They absolutely love it when we bring fresh browse in here. So we'll cut down fresh browse, put it out, and they'll feed on that, which is really, really good for their teeth. So everything that we do has another benefit to it. And they enjoy their food. Really important that you enjoy what you eat. They enjoy their food, and they get fed twice a day. There's many things that you can do. So that, Flash has got Gordon up here doing what Gordon does, as what Flash does, sleeping, and they get on really, really well. So they are a solitary species in the wild, generally speaking, but they do coexist quite happily or very well in a captive environment. So it's not easy to enrich a sloth, but if you know what you're doing and you know how to look after them and you take care of the environment, then that kind of takes care of them. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Thanks for joining us, guys. As it is International Sloth Day, we would love it if you were able to help us support our charity of the year, which is Sloco, who look after and protect sloths in the wild. And please just donate whatever you can, and we'll be extremely grateful. So thanks for joining us, guys. From me and Flash and Gordon, thanks for listening.